Well, we'll start the questions and answer session, and before we do so, I just want to introduce the new actors and actresses. Margaret Desmond, Anya Ryle, Peter Thorne and Dermot Thorney. They're our members of the expert advisory group, and anon they will be hopefully assisting with the questions you want to ask. First of all, I'm going to go around each table, as you know, and I'm going to ask the facilitator to indicate the questions on which there's broad consensus, and with them, the idea being that we forget them if there's consensus. We'll start table 1.
I'm the facilitator for table 1, and there is broad consensus at this table on all questions except questions 7, 9 and 11.
Thank you very much. Table 2.
On table 2, there is consensus on questions 2, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 12 and 13. There are some matters arising out of questions 1, 3, 5, 10 and 11.
Thank you very much. Table 3.
There is consensus on questions 1 to 10 and 13.
Yeah. So we're only 11 and 12. 11 and 12, yeah. Table 4.
The citizens at table 4 have broad consensus on questions 1 to 13. Their issues are 1 and 2.
Yeah. Very good. Table 5.
Thank you, Judge. Table 5, there is broad agreement on questions 2, 6, 8, 10, 11, 12 and 13. There are some issues on the rest of on the other questions.
Very good. Table 6.
Table 6 is consensual on questions 7, 8, 11, 12 and 13.
Sorry,
and
did you say is there questions on those tables?
no, we're okay with those ones, yeah. 7, 8, 11, 12 and 13. Now we have queries on the others.
Yeah, very good. Thank you very much. Table 7.
Thank you. On table 7, we have broad consensus on questions 3 to 12 inclusive. So 1, 2 and 13 we have issues with.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Table 8.
Judge, table 8 has consensus on all questions except 7, 9 and 11.
Very good.
Yes, Judge, in respect to the citizens at table number 9, citizens have broad consensus on number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9 and 12.
Very good. Table 10.
The citizens at table 10 have consensus on all questions with the exception of questions 7, 8 and 13.
Thank you. Table 11.
Judge, the citizens at this table have consensus on most of the questions with the exception of 1, 2, 8 and 9.
Very good. Table 12.
Judge, the citizens at table 12 have consensus on all questions except 7, 9 and 13.
Thank you very much. Table 13.
Judge, the citizens at table number 13 have consensus on number 12, or number 10 and number 12, just the two of them.
There's consensus on those two?
On just them two.
So queries on all the remaining?
There's a query on every, all the other remaining questions.
Okay. Dare I say it? Dare I say it? It's not designated table 13 for nothing. Table 14.
Judge, the citizens at this table have consensus on all questions with the exception of 3 questions, numbers 3, 7 and 13.
Very good. Thank you very much. All right. Were you going to do this? Yeah. Sharon will work out the questions on which there isn't consensus, and then we'll look at those questions. We'll regard the others as not requiring any further consideration. Oh yeah, that's what I understand. Yeah.
So I think we're focusing on certainly question 1, question 7, question 2. I mean, I suppose what I'm trying to establish here is where's the cut-off? Maybe anything like if we do anything with 6 or more, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 questions to discuss.
Yeah.
Anything with 6 or more queries.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
In that case, it's to question 1, question 2.
Sorry, question
1, question 2, question 7, question 9, question 11, and question 13.
13. Yeah.
So let's just do that again. Question 1, question 2, question 7.
Yeah.
Question 9, question 11, and question 13.
Yeah. So
And they're the tables, they're the questions at which six or more tables expressed. You want to discuss it.
Yeah. Very good. We have had a look at the outcome of that exercise, and just having regard to the questions in relation to which 6 or more tables have expressed a view that they wanted to have a discussion. Those tables are the questions are question 1, question 2, question 7, question 9, question 11, and question 13. So in respect of each of those questions, 6 or more tables have expressed a view that they want to discuss the matter. So, I mean, we'll be here, as the saying goes, until Tim's Eve. If we go beyond that, we have 6 questions there. So I'll start with question 1, and I'll hear some observations, not necessarily from everybody, but so I mean, I would ask the members and the facilitators to be realistic about this. We have a time frame to comply with, so keep the questions short, and we'll try and deal with them. So on question 1, we'll start with table 4.
5.
Oh, sorry, 5. I beg your pardon.
Thank you, Judge. The citizens at this table had an issue in relation to question 1. And of those 6 questions that are under discussion, this also relates, the same theme relates to question 7 and question 9.
Yeah.
And it's about the sub-questions, or the creation in the case of section, question 7, the creation of the subsections so that a citizen can vote yes or no for each of the constituent parts.
Sorry?
For example, in question 1,
Yeah, yeah.
So they want to be able to vote
in question 1, what the citizens at this table wanted to do was have the option of voting yes or no for each of the subsections there, 1,
Yeah.
2 and 3.
But if you'll notice, what they're only examples of the sorts of powers that or functions that could be conferred on a new body or an existing body. It says such powers should include but not limited to. So I thought I made it clear in the explanation that we didn't want to get down to the nitty-gritty of the powers and functions. It was just the focus is on the overall thrust of the question. So I mean, it'll upset the apple cart or even the apple tart if we go that route. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes, Judge, thank you. That similar theme arises in relation to question 7 and 9. Now, in question 9, there are already subsections, and there was a suggestion from table 5 that the points in question 7 would be broken out, offering 3 bullet points on which a citizen could vote yes or no as well.
So you're talking about...
I'll read that out in the interest of clarity.
Yeah. On question 7, you want to break it down to peat extraction.
Yes, question 7 would then read, the state should immediately end all subsidies for peat extraction and instead, A, spend that money on peat bog restoration, B, retraining those workers impacted, and C, providing new employment opportunities for them.
Yeah.
Are they to be presented as options?
Yeah, you want those presented as options, is that...
The request from this table was that they would be presented separately as options.
Separately as options.
Within question 7, and it would be A, B, and C.
Yeah.
Okay, I think let's move on to the next.
We'll move on. There doesn't seem to be, nobody seems to be in favour of that. Am I right in that conclusion? Yeah, all right. Then we'll move on. Yeah, and then...
And that same theme in relation to question 9.
Yeah. And you want to vote on each of the bullet points, is that it? Yeah.
In relation to question 1, there was a proposed change in the language for point 3.
Right. Yeah, and what was the change proposed?
The new body should be able to penalise and hold accountable departments directly for failing to meet the annual climate change targets for that department, and should only have targets that are endorsed by the new body.
Yeah. I don't see the sense of that, to be honest. I'll just hear what the members of the expert advisory group think. Anya, would you like to say?
Yes, I appreciate fully where you're coming from, Table 5, and I suppose the first thing I would say is if you're talking about language like penalising and holding to account, that would normally be the role of the courts, and the proposal here, because we're very conscious that the citizens, the members, were very keen to ensure some oversight and compliance mechanism, and that's really the thinking behind point 3. But the way we've put it to you is that it's the new or the existing independent body that will be tasked with taking action to enforce, and then that would be before the courts, who would then have the power to penalise and potentially take whatever action would be necessary.
Yes.
If I can just follow up, there is an issue with annual targets in that use of carbon is highly dependent upon the weather. So if you have a particularly mild winter, your demand for heating will go down, and the department might meet its target, and that's the sense of having 5-year targets. It kind of irons out some of the variability that naturally occurs in our use of carbon because it is limited to the environmental conditions.
Judge, I think one of the citizens would like to follow up that point.
Yeah, well,
Just very quickly, the general reasoning behind it was that if you start approaching it from a legal perspective, departments, etc., whatever the organisation might be, will simply tie up the new body with legal challenges. And we have got a limited deadline. We're talking less than 10 years to get our act together, presumably. And what do you want to spend 5 or 6 years with a spaghetti junction of legal challenges?
Yeah.
If they had actual teeth and actual the gravity of the situation was with them and they could do something about it and they could do it sharply and quickly and succinctly, it would make a lot more sense than getting involved in paying lawyers' fees.
But the reality is they couldn't. There is no mechanism by which they could whack, if I may use that expression, the department, except by going to court. It's the only way it could possibly be done, and that's why we phrased it in that way. What Dr. Ryle said is absolutely correct. The only way you can enforce
but to set up
regulation is by going to court. You can't do it otherwise.
If you were going to set up a new body, would you not have to pass some legislation in order to do it?
You couldn't do that. I mean,
No, but you're talking about setting it up. If you're going to set it up, then legally you could put in the provisions so that they have these powers. Is that not? No?
It couldn't be done. A penalty could not be enforced. A penalty could not be imposed, I should say, first of all, or enforced by any body in this jurisdiction other than the appropriate court, the court that has been given that jurisdiction. So there's absolutely no way it couldn't happen.
But doesn't the EPA have ability to fine people at the moment?
But just to take that point, because I appreciate, of course, where you're coming from, and nobody wants delay or unnecessary expensive court proceedings. But to take your example of the EPA has power to prosecute, but it's the courts then impose, if an offence is found to have been committed, it's the courts then impose the penalty. And I suppose just to point out one further issue, a point of clarification, what's proposed currently in question 1 is the establishment of a new or existing body. So it might be the case that an existing body's powers might simply be augmented. But I take your point that obviously legislation will be needed to give the new powers to an existing body or to create the proposed new body. So there's no fast, unfortunately, there's no fast here you are now solution.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Sorry, Judge, there was one further point. There was a request for the addition of another question under Section A. That the state should revise their effort-sharing regulation targets for emission reductions for 2030 upwards. And yes or no as a referendum question.
I just is any other table interested in adding such a question? No. All right.
Thank you, Judge.
Yeah. All right.
Sorry, I'll be quick. The reasoning behind that question was, much like Andy Kerr was saying in Scotland in 2008 when they were introducing legislation, they increased their targets for emission reductions. What Brian Lanigan said has been done in Ireland. They've reduced their targets for emission reductions for 2030. That doesn't show that it's a priority and it's certainly not cohesive to leadership. That's why I thought it would be a valid question
All right.
on the ballot paper.
Thank you very much for that explanation. Does that change any of the views of any of the tables? All right, very good. We will leave that. Then the next table. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Judge. Just for question 11, some of the
Yes.
citizens at this table were looking to split it into two questions. So the first part, or the first question within it, would be, it would end at emissions from agriculture, and then the second question would start, there should be rewards. So just to split it into two questions.
Might be helpful to just give the rationale for that.
So just one of the citizens was, and only gave it as an example, so that there's no incentives to encourage, say, the fitting of solar panels, or that there was no incentives for farmers maybe to sell back the electricity to the grid. As I said, that was just given as an example. It's not necessarily
No, that's not what question 11 is about.
No, and it was just more as an example in terms of not necessarily putting it into the question.
Dermot, yes.
Going to say that the sorry.
It's on.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that point is covered under one of the other questions relating to the feed-in tariff. That would apply to homeowners. That would also apply to farmers. So that element of what was covered in the presentations yesterday is captured under a different question.
Yeah. I think yes.
So
Peter.
just in general, that question or that query does raise something about the model for many of these questions, which try and marry both the penalty of the carbon intensive with the benefits or encouraging the good climate solution, if you like. And if you split the question up, the trouble is that you could get lots of unicorn things where you say the government is going to pay for all the good bits that we want. But where's that money coming from is then a challenge. If you answer no to all the tax bits and yes to all the benefit bits, you end up with something that looks a bit like we want all our cake and we want to eat it. And Brexit, and I'm British, is a very good rationale of why you maybe don't want to pose questions that are overly simplistic. We do need to recognise that you need to modify the behaviour, and that needs both carrot and stick. So I would be against personally splitting questions into carrot and stick explicitly, because it's going to get you answering yes to carrot and no to stick, and where does that leave the government and the state in terms of taking the leadership role?
Yeah. I mean, the three elements of question 11 are interconnected. Yeah.
Judge, I would agree with that entirely.
Yeah.
It's an interconnected question, so you can't answer one without considering the other part of the question.
Yeah. Table 1, yeah.
Just on that question 11, is it not that agriculture does provide food, which is essential? So, like, yes, I agree with carrot, but like the stick, should it not even be excess greenhouse gases? Because, like, if you want cows, if you want milk, you need to have methane. You do. So, like, excessive greenhouse emissions on agriculture, fine. There should be some acceptable allowance that if you want food produced in your country, then there should be a tax on every greenhouse gas emitted. The stick is excessive, in my opinion, because methane is a byproduct of farming.
Yeah. Would anybody like to, Dermot?
Maybe I could come in on that. I think the point of a tax on greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture is that you're right that methane is produced from beef and dairy and from sheep as well, but different kinds of farming have different kinds of greenhouse gas, different levels of greenhouse gas emissions. So, for example, poultry is lower in terms of the impact of methane and greenhouse gas emissions. Growing vegetables has a different impact again, and the idea of a tax is that it would differentially price the outputs of different kinds of agriculture. So that's the thinking behind the model in this question.
I suppose a bit like the way diesel is dealt with and Yeah. Petrol. They're dealt with. They're separate ways of dealing with them. Yeah.
Just before we move on, I suppose it's important to state as well that members are free to vote against any of these proposals. And what we're not necessarily trying to do is arrive at a wording that everybody's happy with. It's to pose, I think this is a good example of a difficult question on the ballot paper for people to ponder and consider and decide how they want to vote.
Yes. Table 9.
Yes, Judge, I'm the facilitator for Table 9. The citizens had just some very short, concise points, just restructuring some of the ballot questions. It was just in relation to number 1. They wished for some inclusion of a reference that there should be no further delay in the establishing of whatever new body was to be set up. And maybe there should be some emphasis on expediting the establishing of the body, as they noted that the guest speakers made reference to challenges and delay. In respect to ballot question number 11, some of the citizens at the table suggested the removal of the last line. They were of a view that people would automatically move towards more economic, more climate-friendly practices when they see the economic benefit. So the fact the last line was redundant. And in relation to ballot question number 13, they suggested the inclusion of the word "and regulation" after the word "supports" in the first line.
All right, we'll go back to number 1, question 1 first, because it's the simplest. You want some sort of a time limit?
Exactly. They were concerned, the guest speakers made reference that one of the main challenges is delay from one body to another body and having another party being responsible. And they just wished for some reference that whatever new body is set up, that it would be expedited and there would be no further delay in it being established.
I suppose just to stress again that the question 1, the main body of question 1 speaks about a new or existing independent body. So it isn't necessarily the case that there would be a new body established. Just to stress again that there is the possibility within this for an existing body to be given more powers under legislation. So it's whether and to what extent we could put in some wording like expeditiously. We have urgently in there already in terms of urgently addressing the climate challenge, but your point is a distinct point.
You see, the word urgently is already there.
Absolutely. I think what the citizens were more concerned about, if a new body was established, that there be some degree of expedition on it.
Yeah, we'll give that some thought. Make a note of that. Very good. And have I dealt? Oh yeah, in relation to question 11.
Correct. They were suggesting just the removal of the last line, as they felt that people would automatically go into more climate-friendly practices when they see the economic benefits. They thought there was no need for that line.
So that line was very specifically in there to say that if any revenue is raised from the agricultural sector, it should be recycled into the agricultural sector. And we were thinking about things like marginal lands and supporting a transition to more climate-friendly practices in marginal lands, or supporting farmers who are in trouble. So the rationale behind that line is that you don't, that any excess revenue raised goes back into the agricultural sector. It doesn't disappear somewhere else, which we thought was an equity and fairness issue to a very important sector for Ireland.
Yeah. I mean, the second sentence might be an offset against tax imposed by the first sentence, but the third sentence deals with a broader scenario.
Very good.
Yeah, very good. And then, did you have one other one?
Yes, just in relation to question number 13, they suggested the inclusion of the word "and regulation" after the word "supports" in the first line. Yeah, we'll consider that as well. What?
Oh, yeah, yeah, oh, yeah. Will you make a note of that? Yeah, yeah. All right. Who else? 14, yeah.
The citizens at this table, in the context of earlier discussion around question 11, would like to highlight their suggestion in relation to question 13 is after and encouraging organic farming to add in encouraging solar farms.
Well, we're talking about land use. I mean, this section, this particular question deals with land use, and that's why we've referred to planting forests
And I think it was
and
the
organic farming.
it was the use of
Peter?
solar farms
Yeah.
on the land.
Yeah, I mean, for very marginal land, a solar farm or wind microgeneration or any number of alternative means of using the land would be equivalent. So we could, yes, further that list or make clear that those are simply examples. But I think we had in mind when we were asking this question, trying to think about a range of uses of the land with a view to the question that had been given, or the presentations that had been given yesterday.
Well, what's Peter suggesting?
So essentially that we could consider putting.
Yeah, yeah. Will we consider that? Yeah, I wouldn't be in favour of it. Yes, table 6.
So, Judge.
Sorry, do you still have one?
Yeah,
sorry.
we've another.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
Yeah.
fine, Judge. The question 7.
Yes.
Yep. Under the peat extraction section, to add another standalone question to read a phased time frame for the ban on peat extraction for private use.
Yeah. We'll consider that as well.
And that are the 2 amendments from table 14.
Yeah. There's some logic in that. Very good. Table 6, yeah.
The citizens at table 6 would like to add for question 1 an additional recommendation that such a body should consider appointing a county architect similar to that in Westport and Clonakilty, where one would oversee and drive sustainable spatial planning and implementation of environmental friendly initiatives, and to consider such around public transport. That's for question 1. Question 2 would like, a better say clarification on what is meant by increasing the resilience of public land and infrastructure.
Yeah, well, Peter, would you like to comment? Margaret, yeah.
Yeah, so we were thinking here about basically the ability of lands that's in public, the state ownership, to be able to, I suppose, to withstand climate change, but particularly where some of these lands perhaps could be used to address climate impacts. So, for example, if you think about flooding, perhaps there might be possibility of some of this land to be allowed to attenuate, to take excess water at the time of flooding. So this is obviously an issue for rural areas. The same thing with infrastructure, again, would be infrastructure that's in state ownership, how that can be built in such a way or retrofitted that it can be resilient to the actual impacts of climate change. So this came up very much, I think, at the early presentation, the first day that Conor Murphy gave, in relation to the expected impacts, particularly from extreme weather events. So it is to try and think through how future lands and infrastructure can be built and fixed in such a way that it will withstand the impacts that we're expecting to come down along the line to us.
Yeah. Does the table get the message from that?
Okay. Question 9 would like to add an additional recommendation to it, where state lead by example on their own cars, say electric cars, where practical.
Well, we have that covered in an earlier section, in an earlier question, haven't we? Question 2. we're saying that they should take a leadership role, and they should electrify public vehicles. It's already there, really.
Okay, and would like to see an additional question added for a vote to be taken, that say subsidising any devices that will sell back energy to the grid.
We have.
So that's implicit under question 3, and it's actually answered under question 3 under qualification 1, where if you are making payments on carbon-intensive activities, that funding is protected, and it's used to do precisely that kind of thing, to either for social housing or put them in entirely, or for private housing to subsidise their use. So it's about taxing. Question 3 is really at heart about taxing the bad carbon-intensive behaviour, using that money to fund public and private transition on an accelerated rate to a low carbon, which would include things such as solar, heat pumps, electric cars, everything that else that is being discussed.
I understand that. The issue I had is that when Britain started an initiative where they were allowing households to sell back to the grid from solar panels, the biggest obstacle they had at the time was the capital cost of the solar panels. So the government subsidised them, and that automatically meant that everybody, very modest houses, started using solar panels. So it was the combination of both the subsidy on the capital cost and selling back to the grid. And I think that might just be the kicker that starts that revolution in this country. And I'd just like to see that maybe, in addition to selling back, that we have an additional issue there that, for example, we'd like to see that the capital cost of individual solar panels or individual any other energy efficient initiative is subsidised by the state, where the capital cost is prohibitive to the implementation of such.
Absolutely, and that is entirely what we were trying to get at in question 3 and its qualifications, particularly qualification 1.
Yeah, but I think an express question might help that.
Yeah.
And there was another one as well we had on. There was one other issue there in terms of the charging people. The additional tab. What number was that? Yes, in question 3, are we willing to pay higher taxes on carbon initiative activities? And I think anything related to that should be at source, as opposed to at point of purchase. So if you're like the plastic bag levy, so that it's not a general taxation. It's if you're going to buy something that has a high carbon intensity, that you're paying extra tax at that point, like the plastic bag levy. What question was that? Okay. All right.
Yeah, I think that's captured in the question about the taxation system, that goods that you buy would be taxed according to the content, the carbon content that they contain. So you would, a bit like the plastic bag tax, you would be incentivized towards buying certain products and disincentivized from buying other products.
Hi. Sorry, it was just in relation to question 1.3. I just was aware of a case recently where the government was taken to court over its legal obligations to climate change, and it was dismissed because there's no constitutional right to an environment. And I'm just wondering, is that something that we could kind of put into that question 3 to maybe, or if the panel are aware of whether that's something that can be tackled by that question?
Would you mind repeating that?
Sorry. It was just with regard to legal proceedings against the state. It's just I was aware of a case recently where the state were taken to court over their climate obligations, and the case, I believe, was dismissed because there's no constitutional right to an environment. And I just wondered if, as per point 3, if we want to pursue the state legally, is that something we need to take into consideration?
Just on that, my understanding, and I'm open to correction, but my understanding is that litigation is currently ongoing.
Okay.
And there's a number of cases, I believe, currently before the High Court, and I'd prefer not to comment, obviously, with ongoing litigation, but and I'm open to correction, but I'm not aware that the case where the explicit right concerning an a constitutional right to some adequate environment, where that argument has been made, I don't think that has come to an end at this stage.
Okay.
Yes, and I'll just say the same thing, basically. There is no express right in the Constitution to environmental protection. It is being argued in some cases that are pending at the moment that it is a non-enumerated right, what we would call a non-enumerated right. Those cases are ongoing, and so obviously we can't comment on them.
Okay.
So I don't think it would serve anything by putting that provision in. Yeah.
Yes. I think what you may be recalling was the decision in relation to the Apple, the data center. This issue did arise there, and the objection, as I understand it, was dismissed because the court found that the state did not have, that the state wasn't, the planning decision was not in contravention of the state's plan for climate change mitigation, because there were no targets set out in the mitigation plan. I may be incorrect on that, but I think that's the case. And that if that is the case, then point 2 of question 1 deals with that by proposing to set out targets.
Okay. I think it was to do with the airport, but anyway, it's fine.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I think she's right, Chair. Table 2.
Just a number of points. A number of the citizens on the table, just in relation to question 1, felt that the appendix or subsection number 3 should be omitted in its entirety. In relation to question 11, it was felt there was a missed opportunity not to tie the amount of subsidies currently given to agriculture or farming businesses, that they should be linked to reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. And there was one other suggestion, just in terms of housing, that the inclusion of a specific question in relation to the future building of domestic house dwellings, that they be linked to a zero carbon type system from a very short time bound year, be it 2018 or 19, allowing for consideration that certain technologies are still being developed. That being the case, then we may have to wait for a longer period, that something be enacted in law that would allow that as these technologies take place, that developers would be basically made to.
I understand what you're saying, but that is not something that anybody who spoke to us raised or discussed. Am I right in that? Yeah. It's not something, I mean, we're not clear on the implications of that. We would have had to have had some advice on that.
And there was one point on question 10, I know sorry that it's not one of the questions you were going to discuss, but it was strongly felt by all of the table that the specific reference, quote, to particular attention on rural areas, that be omitted, that it's a complete nation that needs to be addressed in terms of its public transport system and how resources are allocated, etc. So that just giving particular attention to rural areas was deemed to be
we were very conscious
unfair.
of the fact that over the discussion yesterday in particular, and maybe on the last weekend, that there is a distinction between urban areas and rural areas, and we didn't want to ignore the difficult situation that rural areas may be into, but we've left it in a very, very general way.
Corrected, sorry, the whole table didn't agree with that. I think there was one other general point made by a citizen that just noted that there was very little attention given to the industry of marine, be it cruise liners coming in or out, or the fishing boats from harbours, and that the net contribution that they make to pollution and their responsibilities in terms
again,
of
it's
a cleaner,
something
greener environment.
It's something we didn't have on our agenda and we didn't address because the topic is so large and we had to specify what we thought were the most important areas. So I don't think we can go there really in the absence of a discussion on it.
Thank you very much.
It's an interesting point. I accept that.
Yeah, just to be noted. Thank you.
Yeah. Of table 4.
Table 4 have proposed that on question 1, part 2, instead of to propose, it should be to set ambitious 5-year national and sectorial targets. On question 2, they'd like to see the word leadership at the start of the question changed to read, the state should take an ownership role in addressing climate change. And then their last point will be, probably maybe suited to question number 8, will be, would like to see congestion charge included on the ballot paper.
What did he say about that? To say, yeah. I mean, the body we envisage, whether it's an existing body or a body that is established, will only be in a position to propose.
Yes, just on that point, and indeed John Fitzgerald addressed it in passing in his talk this morning, that setting policy is the job of government and politicians, and the best that we felt we could propose here is literally to propose. But our clear thinking was that account would be taken of whatever's proposed by government, that it wouldn't be an empty message. So that was the thinking. We felt that this was genuinely as far as we could go to propose being the appropriate wording. And if I may, Judge, while we're on question 1, if I could go back to table 2, because if I understood you correctly, table 2, you suggested omitting point 3 of question 1 in its entirety. And I wonder, Judge, if I could just ask your reasoning for that proposal, please.
I suppose just a general principle of the state, suing the state in general, not just in this particular area. You'll see there's a waste of time and a waste of money. Put the two of them in the room and bang their heads together. Yeah, they're both employees of the state and of the citizens. So it's supposed to be a general principle that the state really should be suing the state. Their job is to sort things out. And there are enough mechanisms in place. You can cut your annual allocation. There's other ways of skinning the cat.
I suppose just to say, I take your point. I mean, everybody in principle would prefer to avoid litigation at all costs for very obvious reasons. But I suppose the simple answer, insofar as there is one, to what you're saying is nobody is above the law. The state is not above the law. So the state is accountable and must be held to account. And my sense was that that's what the members sought, oversight and compliance. And this was the best we could propose. But I take your point.
And it does happen in an awful lot of areas. A lot of governmental bodies are given express power to protect the interests of the citizens, and that's what this is about. And it's necessary in terms of ensuring that the law is complied with. Where are we going now? Table 8, sorry.
Oh, sorry, there's another one here at 4.
Yeah.
Part 2.
Yeah.
Would you mind addressing that part for the citizens? On question 2, changing the word leadership to ownership.
Well,
I suppose the first thing that I would say is that it goes back to our remit, which talks about state leadership. So I would be inclined to stick with the wording that's in the resolution of the Oireachtas, which speaks of leadership. But again, that's something that's open to discussion.
I think the citizens proposed that because they feel that leadership is where they've actually failed, so maybe making them take ownership would actually then give them the leadership.
In general, are the citizens happy with the expression should take a leadership role?
And then just on the idea to propose congestion charge, as I said, maybe into question 8.
Yes. You're getting into specificity in a big way when you go to congestion charge. We discussed that. In fact, we've discussed most of the points that have come up. Does anybody want to say anything on congestion charge? Yeah, Dermot.
Yeah, our thinking in how question 8 is framed is that we should first of all ensure that citizens have alternatives before imposing a congestion charge. So you should have put in place park and ride schemes, cycling lanes, better public transport, and then once those are in place, you should, once people have viable alternatives, you should then impose the congestion charge. But to impose it from the start would be unfair on people who don't have alternatives.
Yeah, I would just follow up that the congestion charge isn't necessarily the only tool you could use. You could use lane management, you could use parking charges.
Yeah.
So that's why it was priority should be given to these modes. So for private car use, our intention was that it was implicit that there would be some penalty mechanisms to car use, which would be either through making it harder or making it more costly. But if the citizens wished, we could spell it out. It would make for a much longer question.
Yes.
The citizens at table 1 had comments on question 7 and 9. In respect of question 7, it was suggested, and I should add that there wasn't complete agreement at the table on this suggestion. The state should, instead of immediately end, to insert phase out instead. So the state should phase out all subsidies for peat extraction. And then in respect of question 9, in the second subpart, the second last line, instead of reductions in motor tax, the abolishment of motor tax, and instead of for electric vehicles, for carbon neutral vehicles. And the reasoning there was that electric vehicles, while the electricity is from non-carbon or from fossil fuels, there was no benefit to this, so carbon neutral reflected carbon neutral policies. There was also a suggestion, I'll just say for what it is, that these separate parts should be segregated into options A, B and C, but there's been comments on that before. The reasoning was that some citizens felt that they would vote no simply because of the first subsection, whereas they were in agreement with the second two parts. And then one citizen at the table asked me to comment in respect of question 1. Do we not already have a very skilled body in the Climate Change Advisory Council as an existing body?
Yeah, well, the reason we've referred to a new or existing independent body, we were thinking of the Climate Change Advisory Council, but what this is about is the functions and the powers that are given to the body. So, and you'll see that we've used the word augment, I think, haven't we? Augment, or what did we use it there? Yeah. But anyway, the focus of that question is on functions and powers.
Do you want to talk about this?
What?
The peat extraction, do you want to see what the room thinks about this idea of phasing out?
Oh yeah, that's how do the members feel about in question 7 substituting phasing out for immediately ending? We could have maybe a show of hands on those who would favour the change proposed. Well, I think it's...
Could you reframe the question to have an either or framing out?
Right.
Could you reframe the question to have phasing out or immediately ending?
Yeah. What is this? Yeah, would that create complete confusion? It wouldn't be specific. Yeah.
Maybe making it clear you wanted an end.
Yeah. One possibility is to have the two options there. The state should immediately end or phase out. What did the expert advisory group think of that?
I think coming back to Sharon's point earlier on, these questions should be questions that are difficult to answer, that make you ponder, that that some of you may vote yes to and others may vote no to, and that was our thinking in phrasing it in terms of immediately ending, that it's a tough question for you to answer, and you'll have to think hard about it.
The next table.
Judge, that was one of our suggestions for question 7. Will I just read it out anyway?
Yes.
My question.
Yeah.
The citizens at table 7 suggest that they were concerned about the word immediately end and could phase out be put in instead within a certain frame time. And
did they suggest a phase time? Yeah.
Question 11, they suggested maybe that the order of the sentences be changed around to put the positive first.
To put which first?
The positive, the sentence number 2 before sentence number 1.
Yeah.
That's it.
I kind of envisage this question 2 being an offset. Does anybody, I don't know, do you see any advantage to changing it around?
No, I wouldn't see any advantage. I think there's a logic to the emissions reduction, and then with the sequestration is part of that, part and parcel. So the objective is, first off, is the emissions reduction. That's what we're really trying to get at.
Yeah, very good. Well, we go back to 7 again. Yeah. Maybe it's a very basic point, and I can see the 2 points of view on it, but maybe we'd see how many people are in favour of keeping it as it is. The state should immediately end all subsidies. What?
It's very close.
It's very close. It could well be a draw. What? We'll reflect on it. Yeah.
If the answer is that they don't want to, that's an answer.
Oh, yeah. And as Sharon reminds me, for those who are not in favour of this proposal, you put your X in the no box. Sorry? Yeah.
Alan, do you just want to say that into the mic for the benefit of others?
It gives the wrong message if you go yes or no on it, because I think everybody agrees it should end. The question is whether or not it's fair to people who are dependent on it, whether they're immediately stopped or not.
Yeah.
So I don't think it should be that hard a question. I think it should be either, you could put both in, you could say immediately or phase out, and let whoever's legislation do it, decide that. But I think if you make the issue about whether it's end or phase out a yes or no issue, now you're going to get the wrong message.
Well, but maybe we do the 2 options then. Yeah, we'll discuss it. We'll discuss it. I mean, we're taking on board everything that everybody is saying on it.
Table 1.
Yeah.
They just have a small related point. We'll come back to you, Pat.
still the issue in question 9 to, I had suggested 2 amendments to part 2 of question 9. Instead of reductions in abolishment of,
Yeah,
and
you
instead
said
of electric.
abolition of motor tax, yeah. Sorry, did you say something else as well as abolition of motor tax?
Carbon neutral vehicles.
Oh, yeah, that's right, yeah. Anybody?
Yeah, question 10, or table 10.
Yeah, right.
I'm the facilitator for table 10. Very briefly, the citizens would like to change 2 questions. With regard to question 7, just at the very end, they would like to add the line, or a substantial remuneration package.
Or you, I suspect you mean redundancy package, do you?
No, the wording I was given was remuneration.
Yeah. But,
or redundancy.
But if they've got no job, they've got no remuneration.
Okay. Are we happy with redundancy? Yes. And very briefly on question 13, just to change the wording very slightly, it currently says the state should review and revise supports for land use diversification with particular attention to supports for planting forests, and insert here, according to best environmental practices, and encouraging organic farming.
Yes. Yeah, very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll consider those.
Sorry, just one comment.
Just one comment.
Yes.
Very quickly. Somebody mentioned setting a standard for all new builds.
Yes.
I know the person from Tipperary Energy Agency last weekend.
Yes. Paul Kenny.
He talked about a deep retrofit of the existing stock being very difficult. The target is to reach a minimum of A3 by 2050, so an A3 standard for all building stock. It is easier to build a new house to these standards than retrofitting, and I believe that was brought up by that person. But to what standard we did not discuss to what standard it should be built, but I think I think it's implied that it should be a minimum of A3.
Yeah. We'll consider that, yeah.
Table 12.
So, yes, table 12.
Thank you, Judge. The citizens of table 12 have alterations to 3 questions. With question 7, they'd like a rewording of it, and everything after peat bog restoration deleted and inserted, and give workers impacted suitable alternative work or a substantial remuneration package. Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Yep. Question 9, bullet point 2, they want after free motorway tolls and removal of VRT from electric cars.
Sorry, could you say that again?
Sorry, question 9, bullet point 2, with the addition at the end of that, and removal of VRT from electric cars.
Sorry, I didn't get that.
Removal of VRT from electric cars.
Oh, yes.
Question 13. With the addition of and all other carbon reducing measures.
At the very end,
Yes.
after organic farming.
Yes.
Does anybody want to say anything on that? because we've included planting forests and we've included encouraging organic farming.
We just. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, we said in response to an earlier one they were just examples, so I would agree with the proposal, which makes clear that it's not just those two specific ones, and that would cover the concerns earlier around, for example, use as solar farms, use for wind, or use for any number of other land management practices. So I would agree with that.
That was the thinking.
Insertion.
Okay.
Table
13, yes.
Thank you, Judge. I'm the facilitator for Table 13. In relation to question 1, there was a minor change suggested so that the word should would be changed to may. So in the last sentence it would read, may include but not limited to. In relation to question 2, there was a suggestion for the word consideration to be added so that it would read consideration of renewable generation on public buildings.
Where's that now, question 2?
That's on question 2, so it would be changed to read consideration of renewable generation on public buildings. And the reasoning behind that is in relation to historic buildings. Some of the members felt that if they were to upgrade historic buildings, there could be damage done by making them, by adding renewable technologies to them.
Well, I mean, what we're giving, the job we're giving, or the obligation we're imposing on the state is to address. So wouldn't that be included in addressing, taking into account the planning considerations and the heritage of the building and all of that? That would be included in addressing, I think. But yes.
I think that would be included. That would be my interpretation of it. Addressing is broad
it's a broad, it's deliberately broad.
To catch just that.
In relation to question 2 as well, some of the members felt that the word electrification should be changed to a more open statement, which would include, say, hydro and other new technologies. And the same issue came up with question 9 with the same word, and so they'd like to see that maybe changed, possibly.
Yes.
In relation to question 7, some of the members would like to see a change so that it's read to improve employment opportunities, removing the word provided. So removing the word providing, so to put improve in instead of providing. It's also been highlighted by some of the members since the idea of packages has came up on some tables that they don't agree with that. They wouldn't agree with the likes of packages being offered.
They wouldn't agree with?
The idea that rumination packages was raised by other tables. Some of the members here have highlighted that they strongly disagree with that.
Yeah.
Could I take question 1, Judge, if I may?
Yeah.
The query. Just if I understood Table 13 correctly, you proposed in question 1 such functions and powers should be changed to such functions and powers may include. Am I correct?
Yeah.
Just to point out that would be a very significant change. The word should is mandatory. In other words, as the judge said very clearly in her introduction, that the thinking here behind the 1, 2, 3 formation is that the body, whether it's a new or significantly ramped up existing body, would have 3, if you like, functions. 1 being advisory, the second being what we call ambition setting in terms of the targets, and then thirdly, of course, compliance and enforcement. So if you change should to may gives government an option that they could pick and choose from the 3, and that might not be what the members want, because our clear sense from your feedback was that all 3 were important in terms of the advice, the expert advice, the ambition setting, the leadership, the urgency, and then, of course, the compliance and enforcement. So just to say, and to repeat and to finish, that would be a very significant change. May is permissible. They could pick and choose. Should, it's all 3, at a minimum.
Yeah. It gives an option, which that's all it does, which need not be implemented.
If I can just, there's one final point, George, in relation to question number 13, and it was raised the issue of forestry land that's placed permanently into forestry and they cannot be removed. Could that possibly be included in 13 in some form to address that issue?
So if I can respond to that, the review and revise was specifically in relation to that. If there is a clear reason why the current policies are not leading to uptake, that is the rationale behind review and revise. We were pretty sure it was a national and not an EU contractual obligation, so it's within the national aegis to change that. And clearly it would be, from the presentations we had yesterday, there would likely be greater uptake. So that's the reasoning behind review and revise.
Yeah.
Table 11.
Yeah, 11.
Judge, table 11. In relation to question 1, citizens at this table are of a similar opinion to some of your previous speakers, i.e. points 1, 2 and 3 should be included individually in the vote. In relation to question 2, citizens at the table would like to see the following sentence included or added at the end of this, and it is, this should be enshrined in legislation of the Constitution. In relation to question 9, citizens felt the points in this should be included as individual questions and voted on individually. And lastly, question 13, citizens felt the following should be added. The forestry schemes could be modified so that a farmer can opt out of forestry after 30 to 40 years.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. The citizens at table 7 had an issue with questions 1 and 2, not so much the wording of them, but that there might be a conflict between the two questions, so that if you gave a body these additional functions and powers, that might supersede the role of the state, might impact on questions 2 and some subsequent questions as well.
Would you have a specific example? Had you something specific in mind to flesh that out or to help us see where you're coming from? We didn't perceive a conflict between 1 and 2, but you might have something specific in mind that could help us.
Not really, but it would just be that this group would have the power, would have all of the power, and the state would really be, down the chain, if you like.
Well, I suppose, to be fair, if the body, whatever it is, would have the power to propose, and that has limitations. If you propose something, it doesn't mean necessarily that it'll be taken up. Okay. It's the state ultimately would still have to determine what direction things go in. So question 1, it's a package, and to go back to the previous comment, 1, 2 and 3 are designed to simply flesh out the overarching intention, which is to try as best we can to put climate change at the centre of policy making. That's the intention. It's not an easy thing to do, but this we thought was as a good formula as any.
I'd say them as quite distinct questions from each other. I mean, certainly question 2 is really looking at mainstreaming, how we actually get all the organs of the state mainstreaming or climate proofing everything that they do. So it's quite a distinct question from number 1. I'd be sure.
Just, I hate to hammer home question 7, but I think we're kind of all slightly agreed in it, but just something like maybe split it, saying the state should end all sublease or peat extraction, and then question goes on, and then break it up saying, if so, should it be immediate or a phase out? So you kind of say yes to ending it, and then follow on immediately or phase out. Just proposition.
Yeah,
I don't know.
that's a good idea.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we've heard an awful lot of material from you that we have to consider, so we'll have to go outside and consider what you've said and come back to you. I don't know how long it's going to take, and I'm conscious of the fact that some of the members have time considerations. So we'll try and do it as quickly as possible so that the voting can start as quickly as possible. So,
but feel free to have a cup of coffee.
what? Oh yes, and yes.